Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is the second part of Chapter 5 Writing Letters. In this part, we're going to concentrate on how to achieve the U attitude and on how to communicate with international business readers. To begin with, whenever we write anything, especially letters, our main purpose is to influence our readers, our audience, positively. We don't want to alienate them. We don't want them to feel like coming from a different planet, and we don't want to antagonize or hurt them, annoy them with what we have written. So, as you write your paper and then review and revise after you uh, check up for your letter, pay special attention to the following guidelines so that you can achieve the you attitude. Never forget that your reader is a real person. Keep the reader in the forefront of your letter. Be courteous and tactful, and do not sound pompous or bureaucratic. Now, when we say never forget that your reader is a real person, it means make sure you keep in mind that your reader has feelings that if, for example, they did not pay for a certain loan, it's because they have a financial problem. So, not to add to that, please make sure you're writing this letter using a respectful tone, a personal and personable way of communication. For example, in this paragraph, you can see how impersonal the message is. The money must reach this office by the last day of the month. Failure to submit the payment will result in the cancellation of the aforementioned policy, which is so inhumane. Now, if you look at a revised message, it's better to say, for example, we have not received your payment. By sending us your check for $50 within the next 2 weeks, you will keep your policy and you can continue to enjoy the financial benefits. Please call us if you have any questions. See how considerate it's the same content. The idea did not change, but the attitude used is personal, is considering the feelings of the reader, etc. Keep the reader in the forefront of your letter is the second point here. What do we mean by keep the reader in the forefront of your letter? It means make sure you talk about how the reader is going to benefit, not about you as a writer. Show the reader why this is good for them, not what is good about you as a writer. So stop saying, for example, I think our shampoo is the best, our company has invented, we found that. It's not that you should not use I and we and our, it's just that when we use them, we should use them to address the reader and the reader's benefits as follows. Our shampooer would make cleaning your comfort rest motel rooms easier for you. Your 200 rooms will be cleaned with ease, etc. Okay. Do you see the difference between an I-centered paragraph and a you-centered paragraph? With a you-centered paragraph, it concentrates on the reader. It keeps the reader in the forefront of the letter. The third point here is be courteous and tactful. Courteous comes from the word courtesy, and courtesy means what? Yep, respect. Okay, so be respectful. And tactful comes from the word tactic, which means knowing how to do something. When you know how to do something, it means you're clever. So be courteous, respectful, and tactful. Clever. Don't change your letter into a punch through the mail. Don't. Okay, so as you can see, a discourteous uh, statement would be, we must discontinue your service unless payment is received. Whereas a courteous one, a respectful one, and a clever one indeed would be, please send us your payment by November 4th so that your service will not be interrupted. It's all about the attitude. Now, the last one here in this guide is, don't sound pompous or bureaucratic. Don't be a show off. Don't try to use very difficult terminology or terminology that is called legalese, as you can see this term here. Legalese is language that comes from contracts, deeds, used by people who try to use the most difficult words to show what they mean. So, for example, use the word now, which is a contemporary term, in comparison to at this present rating. Why do you want to say at this present rating? Now is enough. Clear, easy, and makes the reader feel comfortable. Okay, so these 4 points are the main ones regarding achieving the U attitude. Keep them in mind while you are writing. Place yourself in the shoes of your reader and make sure you are respectful. Now this is a letter that lacks the U attitude. Can you see the format? As you can see, this is full block. We have a letterhead. We have all the information flushed to the left. It starts with the date here, a full date, inside address, salutation, text of the letter, complimentary clause, signature. There is no enclosure here and there is no copy notation. If you read it carefully, you'd see the thank you in a revised letter, for example. If you kindly direct your questions to, etc. Read the figures carefully and check them in the book as well. Now, as for international business correspondence, it is very important to keep in mind that people around the world have different cultures and they don't write in the same way. Therefore, it's always important to ask the following questions before you start writing. What is your status in the relationship to the reader? Are you a colleague? Are you trying to do new business? Are you trying to establish a contract, etc.? How should you format and address your letter? What is an appropriate salutation? How should you begin and conclude your letter? What types and amount of information will you have to give? What is the most important tone to use? All of these questions will be answered here. Okay, so there are basically 11 guidelines for communicating with international readers. You will find them in your book between pages 103 and 111. Now, first and most important point would be use common, contemporary, as we said, easily understood vocabulary. Okay, so for example, it's better to say stop instead of saying refrain. Better to say prevent in comparison to saying forestall, or happy in comparison to saying exultant. Use the simple word stop, prevent, happy. Keep your sentences simple and easy to understand. Well, we know that most of the time we say don't write simple short sentences as if you're a grade 4 student or grade 1 student. But when you are writing to an international reader and you're not sure of how strong their language skills are, make sure to use simple sentences that are clear enough. Avoid multi phrase sentences or or compound complex sentences, etc. The easier and clearer they will be for a reader to process in that case. Avoid ambiguity, which means make sure things are clear and concise. Make sure you use clear words. In so many places, the word might have different meanings. For example, we fired the engine would mean for some people we made the engine stop working, because fire means to put out of work. In another place, fire means to start the fire. So the reader might say, why did they put the engine on fire? Whereas in reality, in this case, fire means to start up, to begin, to turn the engine on. So make sure you avoid ambiguity, you avoid unclear words. Be careful about technical vocabulary, which means sometimes we have to use jargon, technical terms. In case we have to use technical terms, make sure to explain them, because the reader is not necessarily someone who works in the field, and they might have a problem getting your point. So be especially careful about using business words and phrases an international reader may not know, such as amortization, revolving credit, lean manufacturing. If you have to use them, again, I'm repeating, if you have to use jargon or technical terms, make sure you explain them. Avoid idiomatic expressions. As you know, an idiom does not have a literal word-by-word meaning, and it might only be understood in the native culture. So a non-native speaker might not understand your idiom. Saying to someone, I'm all ears, or think out of the box, would mean something else for them. So avoid using that. The same applies to using sports and gambling metaphors. Don't use them because the reader might not understand them. So don't say down for the count, made a pass, or long shot beat the odds, etc. These are gambling metaphors or sports metaphors. Let's not use them. Don't use abbreviations, acronyms, or contractions, because this would confuse the reader, especially if these acronyms or abbreviations are not clear. So, for example, don't use farm because it, or gov, or without the W/O means without. Why would the reader have to go through a dictionary to look for the meaning of that abbreviation, especially that online there might be different explanations? The same applies to acronyms such as ASAP. Don't use ASAP. Just write all of it. Okay? Say as soon as possible. And don't use contractions because sometimes they might confuse the reader and make them think that they are different words. Okay? So for example, want would mean want or won't. Okay, it could make the reader think that it means I want this, I need this, instead of will not do that. What is also very important to address when talking to an international reader is units of measurement. Do not assume that your reader uses this measure instead of that. For example, in Lebanon, we use kilometers and meters, whereas in the States, they use miles and feet. In Lebanon, we use Celsius for temperature, whereas they use Fahrenheit in another place. We buy liters of gasoline, they buy gallons. Well, we use our dollars, Lebanese pounds. They use dollars in the States, they use euros in Europe, in most of Europe, not all of it. So even the currency is different between one country and one continent and another. some people tell time by 12-hour clock, and some people use the military clock, which is a 24-hour clock. So we should also know that. In addition, we should always pay attention to the time differences between the eastern one and the western one, according to the Greenwich line. So, for example, 7 a.m. for us could be like 12 midnight for people in somewhere in the United States or in Australia. It's also very important to note how to record dates because, for example, in Lebanon, we start with the day, the month, and the year, whereas in the States, they begin with the month, the day, and then the year. Okay, so it's very important to know where your reader comes from and which measures are used in the country where your reader comes from. Okay, avoid culture bound descriptions of place. For example, don't say third world countries. In addition to that, make sure, for example, you don't say February, which is a winter month, if you're talking to someone in New Zealand, because in New Zealand, February is a summer month. Use appropriate salutations, complimentary clauses, and signature lines. Make sure you know which salutation is used in that country. Could be Signor, Madame, Frau, Monsieur. And in addition, always use your reader's surname and include a proper title, for example, doctor, sir, father, unless you are informed to do other than that. So you should say Ms. and the family name, for example, Ms. Johnson. For a complimentary clause, use an appropriately formal one, such as respectfully, regards, best regards, which is acceptable in almost any culture. And finally, make sure you find out how the country's custom of signature is, because sometimes in some countries the company's name appears before the writer's name. Sometimes it's the signature, then the name of the writer, then the company's name, etc. And finally, be cautious about style and tone, which is something that you have to be cautious about whenever you write anything, not only letters, because culture plays a major role in how you word your message. For example, Americans expect business letters to be clear, direct to the point, without flowery compliments such as sincerely yours and personal details. In comparison, for example, on the contrary, Japanese or Korean readers want their letter to begin with a paragraph or two on friendship and respect that the writer has for the reader, and then they would go into the business section of that letter. So, this would be the end of chapter 5. Be careful, stay safe, study well, and good luck.